He's on the editorial board of Cultural Studies, the Journal of Communication, and Communication Review, and has served as vice president of the International Communication Association for the Philosophy of Communication Division. Okay, I think the key word here is communication. We are going to find out more about what is going on with surveillance and how this is affecting our lives. So let's welcome Dr. Greg White.
Very much. I'm very pleased to receive the invitation to speak, and I'm glad to speak to you here today. I want to start with figure out this technology.
Just push the blue to the other side.
There we go.
The lights a bit for that.
I teach and study about technology, but I tend to go low-tech as much as possible. Since I study technology, they put me on technology committees and other sorts of things. And they don't realize that there's a Luddite here. So I think it was appropriate. We may never get our 15 minutes of fame.
Can you read if I did that one, or more likely?
We may never get our 15 minutes of fame, it reads, but we've gained a lifetime on surveillance cameras. I want to begin with a couple of examples, one more recent. And that's the example you may have read about the Britton School in Sutter, California, which is near Sacramento, which put in place an experimental program that caused some controversy. Starting January 18th of this year, all students had to wear special ID tags, which had embedded in them an RFID chip, a radio frequency identification device. These chips are ones that can be read by a scanner. We see these in video stores and other places, those strange little plastic things inside DVDs, in library books and the rest. You walk out of the store and an alarm goes off because there are scanners in the door that identify, that send out signals that these little tags respond to. Clothing stores and other places also have tags embedded. So these IDs have these tags in them. Data is wirelessly transmitted by portable tags to a reader. The ID badges therefore continually transmit identification and location information about students. The idea was a scanner would be over the door of a classroom, the student would walk in, it would automatically locate their badge and list them as present. The main reason for putting this in place was to save time and attendance. It's estimated it saves all of 4 hours a month to do this. Such RF tags are currently in use to track inventory. Walmart is going to be putting them in a lot of their products so you can actually track where things actually are in a warehouse and see when things are moving around in real time. Automatic toll collection, as you're driving along, you can drive past without stopping. It's the same technology. And tracking animals and cattle. Students are to wear these because of roll call, and then later they mention, oh, there are security issues too, so they all have to wear these. This experiment only lasted a month. It ended on the 15th because of some controversy about this. Critics pointed out that there had never actually been an attendance issue at this school or a security issue at this school. And the tags, in terms of security, wouldn't prevent kidnapping, wouldn't prevent the entry of strangers. It is simply a way of monitoring the current students. They argue that this is actually relatively undignified to treat one's students as cattle and creates a fundamental distrust about the students, right? That they must have this and therefore they don't trust these students. The issues go beyond the school, because then anyone with a reader, a scanner, can pick up this information from these tags, even if the student's not wearing it. They have it in their backpack. Their name, their photograph, their grade, their school name, their class year, their ID number, all are available through this. We may be used to the idea of security tags in store merchandise, anti-theft devices, and occasionally are given scenarios in commercials and other things where the future of shopping is we walk into a store, we gather whatever we want into a basket, into a bag, into our pockets, and simply walk out, because each item has a little tag embedded in it. And so therefore, you're scanned on the way out. Your credit card is also scanned on the way out because it would also have a chip, and you can mail the bill or it prints out because it can locate everything that you've just picked up. It is convenient, to say the least. New scanners read all tags, not just the tags of a particular store. Issues come up if tags are embedded in products, if there are things that you cannot get rid of or take out, if they're embedded in clothing, that you get scanned walking into a store. And so they know everything that you're wearing or carrying, can create a profile and better market to you. And again, any place with a scanner therefore knows what you're wearing, what you're carrying. And the current scheme is to tag currency. Once it's cheap enough to embed these in dollar bills, $100 bills, $50 bills, what have you, to make cash no longer anonymous. You would know the history of any particular bill, who had it, where it was spent, and how. So that's one example, again. A second, who in here has a cell phone with a camera? Who here knows someone with a cell phone with a camera? Okay. These have become an issue in a number of places. They're banned from federal buildings, some federal buildings, Hollywood movie screenings, health club locker rooms, corporate offices, retail, fashion stores, and other places. There's proliferation of camera technology that it is possible to take pictures without people really realizing that you're taking a picture. You don't have to hold it up. So shooting from the hip. Raises a number of issues. Marshall McLuhan once wrote that North Americans are some of the few people who like to be private in public and public in private. When we go out on the street or in a crowd, we want to be left alone. We don't want to socialize. If we want to socialize, we go inside. So therefore, issues of being photographed or recognized on the street become an issue. This is not true of other cultures who hail each other readily on the street. So cell phone cameras and the proliferation of these cameras in public, even in public places, erodes the privacy we feel and the anonymity we might feel we have in public. Photos taken in a public place can then get posted on the web. There are all sorts of web logs of camera phone pictures. People take these pictures and post them on the web with commentary. So, look at this strange person I saw, without your permission, of course. It is also a new tool for voyeurs. It is harder for individuals with this technology and also businesses and organizations to control images of themselves distributed to the public, to control the spin. Images of you, images of your business, can therefore be distributed without your knowledge. Now, this can go two ways. This can be a bad thing because images of you are being distributed. This can be a good thing in that spin control can be limited. Right? It can be an empowering if there's democratizing potential, if it is disseminated widely. And I want to discuss this in a little bit. So these are just some opening examples that bring up some issues around surveillance, including the fact that there's always good reasons argued, and usually there are good reasons, for surveillance. Things like security, things like convenience, benign information gathering, like health information, having a health record. The problems come when data gets repurposed. Data collected for one purpose gets moved to another. Health records for your healthcare provider, if they end up with your insurance company, become a different matter. And if they end up with your employer or potential employer, that becomes a different matter as well. So repurposing data, or benign data collected for one purpose gets connected with benign data for another purpose, and suddenly it becomes less benign, right, as these things are combined. Databases become leaky, as they say. And there's a question of the slow erosion of civil liberties. So what I want to do today is raise some issues about surveillance, talk a little bit about what surveillance is, what its history is, and talk a bit about the society and culture of surveillance. By the society of surveillance, I mean surveillance and social organization, issues of social power, who surveys, who is surveyed, and the rest. But there's also the issue of the culture of surveillance. Culture having to do with our experience of the world, the meanings we make of the world, the possibilities we see there, and how surveillance impacts that. So to begin, to define surveillance, and to discuss something of its history. We think of surveillance in purely negative terms, usually. The term conjures up George Orwell's 1984. We think of the police using surveillance. We think of also security. We think of technologies to keep us safe, security cameras and the rest. Surveillance is more complex than that and somewhat contradictory. David Lyon, who is a Canadian researcher and one of the key figures in studying the society of surveillance, argues that surveillance has two faces. Surveillance literally means to watch over, sur over veillance, to watch. So the idea of watch over can have two meanings. If I ask you to watch over my young daughter when I'm gone, that can be watch over her, take care of her, make sure she doesn't come to harm. But also I could say, watch over my daughter, right? Control her, make sure she doesn't get into trouble. Right? There are two faces to surveillance. Surveillance is about care, and it's also about control, right? Often at the same time. Society, Lyon argues, wouldn't exist either as a caring institution or as a controlling one without surveillance. For example, if you want to give equal rights to your citizens, for example, the right to vote, you need to know who those citizens are, a form of surveillance. Lyon defines surveillance as any collection and processing of personal data, whether identifiable or not, for the purposes of influencing or managing those whose data has been garnered. Simply data gathering for the purpose of influence. And this is more than surveillance as sort of visual surveillance. Surveillance as data gathering is a much broader issue. So the idea of communication and control. Given this broad view of surveillance, the history of surveillance is also tied with the history of communication and the history of record keeping and the history of society. The earliest records that we have, the earliest writings that we have are economic records, keeping track of who has what, how many sheep one has, how many barrels of oil, and the rest. The Book of Numbers, a 15th century BC accounting of the Jews after they fled Egypt, is a surveillance document about collecting information. In 1066, the Normans invaded England. 20 years later, they produced the Domesday Book. The Domesday Book was an accounting of all landholdings and property down to the individual sheepskin in England. Right? They did this for taxation and control. It needed to be complete so no one could challenge it. The Domesday Book is still used to resolve disputes today, landholding disputes. It was that complete. In the Enlightenment period, these issues come together. The issues of science, rationality, categorization, organization, the search for order, the search in a way to control the world. The Encyclopedia, the great Enlightenment book, is about the organization of knowledge. Science sought to organize living species into phylums, kingdoms, etc. By exploration and colonization and empire, Europeans sought to then survey, gain knowledge, analyze and categorize other cultures. They also turned their gaze inward to survey their own cultures. The birth of sociology at this time, of surveys of the working poor in London and Paris, categorizing what people did, who they were. The police start keeping detailed records at this time as well. This idea of gathering information, organizing information, looking for patterns as a way of control. Now, at this time, there's a key invention or idea that has influenced how surveillance has gone or has formed. And this was the invention of Jeremy Bentham, of what he called the panopticon. In the late 18th century, inspired by his brother's design for a new workshop in Russia, Bentham designed a model prison based on a series of principles. These principles, he said, were generally applicable to any sort of organization, but he was building a prison. The prison he designed was to be a secular version of Psalm 139. I'll read you a passage from Psalm 139. Lord, you have probed me, you know when I sit and stand, you understand my thoughts from afar, my travels and my rest you mark, with all my ways you are familiar, even before a word is on my tongue, Lord, you know it all. Behind and before you encircle me, and rest your hand upon me, such knowledge is beyond me, far too lofty for me to reach. Where can I hide from your spirit, from your presence, where can I flee? If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I lie down in Sheol, you are there too. If I fly with the wings of dawn, a light beyond the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand hold me fast. If I say, surely darkness shall hide me, and night shall be my light, darkness is not dark for you, and night shines as the day. Darkness and light are but one. He took this passage and turned it into a model for a prison. A prison based on being seen, on being visible at all times. The Panopticon prison Bentham's plans are up here. A sketch of a similar type of prison is over here. Kind of hard to see. It is a circular building. It's a circular building. Cells are around the outside wall. There's a central guard tower. He designed the light very specifically so that every inch of every cell is illuminated at all times. The guard tower is always in darkness. So you can never tell if a guard is there watching. You can always see every movement of every prisoner. You have to assume that you're being watched at all times. This helps one internalize good behavior. And Bentham said the guards would watch. They would watch, they would record minute details, and then they would go to the prisoners and read off this list of things that this person had done, so you knew you were being watched. To internalize this, to discipline oneself. The Panopticon was never built. Bentham tried and tried. He could never get anyone to actually build this. He designed entire sort of communities around the Panopticon principle. Places for the insane, the ill, the criminal, little panoptic towns that would scatter the countryside. But they were never built. But as a model of surveillance and social control, it was influential. It was based on a series of principles. To render visible, make something visible, to record, to differentiate, to compare. Correct behavior is modeled and enforced. Deviant behavior is defined, so therefore you get these categorizations, categories of crime, categories of illness. People familiar with the DSM-4. This is the diagnostic manual that categorizes all the mental illnesses, right? This sort of, well, what's wrong and what are the categories? How will you fit within that? Observe, place someone within this. And then spatialization. Everyone has a seat. Everyone has a place. Right? If you're not in the right place, it's noted. These have implications for profiling. In the right place at the right time, wrong place at the wrong time. The Panopticon model is one that gets applied not just in prison situations, but in schools. You have your seat. Your work is recorded. You are differentiated from the other students. You're compared with the other students. Correct behavior is modeled, etc., etc., etc. Workshops, the factories, other sorts of places. Whenever you're dealing with a number of individuals on whom you need to impose a particular form of behavior, the Panopticon model was then used. And again, this is the early 19th century. number of social institutions become relevant here in terms of the history of surveillance. I'll talk about these very quickly. But first, developments in the military at the time. The military becomes systematic, focusing on drill, organization, and hierarchy. Control is about the control and organization of a group of people, especially getting people who are not trained and training them in uniform ways. Surveillance, discipline, and this sort of model of behavior becomes key for transforming the military. And also conscription. The draft requires bureaucratic surveillance, knowing who is eligible or not. In capitalism, surveillance becomes part of the manager's job to oversee the workers. Before the Industrial Revolution, work was done by a season, light, craft, and apprenticeship. You worked when the light was there. You worked via the season. You worked in a craft in which you are apprenticed to someone else. It gave the workers a certain sense of autonomy. Work was piecemealed out to workers who would work out of their cottages, in their own places, with their own tools, at their own time, and then it would sort of be redistributed. What happened was everything was put then in a workshop where you had to show up at a certain time and you followed the clock, you followed artificial light, and sort of production stats, right? How much you produce. The clock in the workshop, you have your seat, you are producing. You become under the control of the capitalists in this case. This is what the Luddites were revolting against. It wasn't just they didn't like machines. The Luddites saw this as a way of undermining their way of life, of simply saying, look, we can hire children, they did, to do this, and so therefore we don't have to hire you. And it was sort of an undignified way of getting rid of a way of life, rather than working with them, and that's what they were rebelling against. But that's also another election. Even Henry Ford, Frederick Taylor at the beginning of the 20th century got involved in workers' lives when they were at work, to control, to survey. Workers' towns, or company towns, were built by the company to specifications. Right? Was there going to be a church to make sure religion was there, that was something that would help ensure a certain type of worker? Education. Are there going to be pubs or bars? Right? All this was a way of almost total control of a worker's life. Bureaucracy. Our lovely bureaucracy is invented about this time as well, the rational organization of society. Max Weber, one of the key thinkers of modern bureaucracy, writes that modern bureaucracies are marked by rationality, efficiency, and social control. Bureaucracies work by generating and collating files or dossiers on individuals. Bureaucracies are about paperwork, creating records. Surveillance society is often called a dossier society. Everyone has a file somewhere, or multiple files that are kept on you. There's school records, dental records, Social Security records, FBI records. You can inquire with the FBI whether or not you have a record. But if you don't have a record, inquiring with them if you have a record creates a record for you. So, if you want an FBI record, you can inquire. One theorist argued that the definition of a human, to be human, is to be a body, a soul, and a dossier. It is said that we have two selves. We have our physical selves and we have our data selves, the shadow selves.
Yeah, little batteries dropping.
While this is going on, can people hear me? Yeah. And more decisions are made that affect our lives based on our data selves and on our physical selves. And this is a point I want to talk to you a little bit more. This is the danger of identity theft, right? That if someone can't steal you, but they can steal this sort of data self, which stands for yourself, which is this shadow self, right, that is out there and has a life of its own. these things take on a life of their own, and judgments about us are based on that rather than us. And then finally, democracy as another sort of form of social organization at this time. And there's assumption that surveillance societies are totalitarian societies. And in fact, the increase of surveillance is one of the key components of totalitarianism. However, as the great 19th century thinker on democracy, Alexis de Tocqueville, pointed out, three things. One, democracies depend on bureaucratic documentation and intervention in order to ensure things like the vote, to collect taxes, customs, licensing, property, etc. For democracy to work, you need surveillance systems and bureaucracy in place. So you need to intensify levels of surveillance. Second, democracies produce privatized citizens concerned with personal welfare. But third, privatized individuals are particularly vulnerable to central state institutions and misuse of data. So by the nature of democracy, you have to create this system which has a tendency to go towards totalitarianism. You also create individual citizenry who focus on the individual rather than the collective, are then vulnerable to these tendencies. So there's this contradiction. Democracy is in a catch-22. Surveillance is necessary, but it can lead to totalitarianism. Grants us liberties, and it takes them away. There are two primary arenas of surveillance. I'll touch on these briefly, relatively briefly, in terms of society of surveillance. The state and the corporate. State surveillance is the government collection of data on its citizens, things like the census and other sorts of record keeping. Usually there are rules and regulations and oversight about the use of that data, right, since it is public for the most part. There's also the collection of data on other countries and other peoples. This is known as spying, and that's part of the surveillance as well. Now, there is something called the echelon system, which I could touch on briefly. This is one of these things that sounds very science fiction. Has anyone heard of the echelon system? Okay, a few people. The echelon system is a global surveillance system that was put in place after World War II, an alliance between the United States and Britain, to basically create a global network of surveillance to try to capture all of global communications. So phone lines, telex lines, telegraph lines, satellite communications, everything that could be tapped would be tapped. And there are stations in Australia and New Zealand. So almost any form of communication that was transmitted globally would be captured, would be fed through computers to check for key terms and to flag key terms. And this has been going on. Finally, it was revealed, I think about a decade ago, in New Zealand. There finally got, some people working on it got tired of the whole secrecy and blew the whistle on the system. There have been reports out by the European Union. There's been all sorts of things. There's been an investigation in Congress, though the U.S. government still denies that echelon exists. Echelon? What echelon? We're not doing it. So the types of things that they capture, they've captured a live conversation with Senator Strom Thurmond was having with someone. They had a file over 1,000 pages long on Princess Diana, capturing everything about her. All these sorts of things get captured. It seems science fiction, but it's actually a program in place. CCTV, closed circuit television, is, when we think of common contemporary surveillance cameras, we think of cameras pointed at public places. Police or civic surveillance by a closed circuit TV. Cameras are placed in public spaces to stop crime. This is the purpose that they are, why they are placed. In Britain, it's argued there's about 2.5 million of these surveillance cameras in public places. This is data from a couple of years ago, so it's probably more. There are 1,500 cameras in the city of London, and it's estimated the average Londoner is photographed between 300 and 500 times a day. The US, which is lagging behind Britain in the creation of this new surveillance state, has, for example, 2,400 cameras, public and private, in Manhattan alone. And I send my students down to Mill Avenue to begin counting various webcams, everything from webcams pointed out at windows, ATMs, other sorts of security cams, not pointed in towards stores, but out towards public space. CCTV, studies have shown, doesn't prevent crime, doesn't stop crime, it displaces crime. It moves it out from where the cameras are to other places. It treats the symptoms of crime and not its causes. It is a technical fix. One of the studies of CCTV use in Britain showed that it really relies on profiling. Who the police officers, and they let these sociologists sit in with the officers while they were watching the screens, while they were tracking people with this, and showed that it's really about profiling. People in the wrong place at the wrong time. Blacks, for example, were followed 1.5 to 2.5 times more than their presence in the population would suggest. So it wasn't simply random, they were targeted as being in the wrong place if you're in the shopping district. Youth were targeted as trouble. This is whether or not they'd actually done anything simply by being in that category. And of the women that were followed by the CCTV operators, 1 in 10 were followed for purely voyeuristic reasons. Not because this is what they had done something. At the same time, CCTV was being advertised to make the city, make women feel more safer on the streets of the city. In New York City, there's a group called the Surveillance Camera Players, and actually Tempe has one of the first branches of this group, that they put on dramatizations in front of surveillance cameras. They'll do a dramatic performance for simply the people who are watching. They'll do it in subways. They've done sort of a surveillance camera version of 1984 and other things. And we'll give tours of Times Square looking at the various cameras. And there's a group called Applied Autonomy that has a website, appliedautonomy.com. And what they've done is they've mapped all the surveillance cameras they can find in New York City. And it's on an interactive map. And what you can do is you can say, I am here, I need to go there. And it will create a route for you so you pass the least number of cameras. So this will put you miles out of the way often. But looking at the density of cameras in places. The other arena of surveillance in the contemporary society is corporate surveillance. This is surveillance that is private data. This is data that is information on you that is owned by others. There's no Freedom of Information Act. This is marketing information, demographic information, target marketing. If people have advantage and reward cards for supermarkets, discount cards, all these other sorts of things can create purchasing profiles on you. This becomes important because if your profile, think of your credit report, doesn't match what they want, then you're not going to be able to get the opportunities that are offered to others. I want to talk about junk mail in a minute. But junk mail is a sign that you're in good stead. They like you, right? So there's also then in the workplace itself has become highly surveyed, especially in the last decade. Email is read, routinely read. Keystrokes are mapped and counted, so as you're typing on a computer, there are systems to see what's on your screen, what are you typing, how fast are you typing, how long was that bathroom break. Plus videos in the workplace, drug testing, and all the rest has become an intensely surveyed situation. These are some of the places and ways that surveillance has been increasing. Just to list others would take the rest of our time. Driver's license information, flight passenger information, movie rentals, all the rest. The level of surveillance that we are commonly under today was once reserved simply for special populations. Royalty would be under constant surveillance because that was their role. They were always in public. Those in prison were under constant surveillance. The insane were under constant surveillance, and the ill under constant surveillance. The same techniques for those special populations are the ones that are then used for everyone today. But the social character of surveillance is changing as well. Surveillance has to do with visibility. It is impersonal. It has to do with trust, and then risk and prediction. We make ourselves, or are made, visible through these regimes of surveillance. Gathering data on ourselves, we become more and more visible. Credit cards, electronic transfers, cards that we swipe and scan, all leave traces, all leave data. Sorts of things where otherwise there would be no record of now become ways that there is more and more of a record. We use cash less. Cash is not traceable until they put RFID chips in it. But we use credit cards, and that is traceable. We are moving more and more things online, buying more things online, looking things up online. This is a situation when you're online, everything you do, every click you make, everything you look at is then traceable and collectible. Amazon knows every book that I've looked at on Amazon.com. If I go into Borders or another bookstore, I can browse through, unless someone is standing there really looking over my shoulder, they don't know everything I've looked at. Amazon can come up with everything that I've looked at. So it is, we in many ways contribute also to our own visibility, as we fill out those warranty cards. We check out, oh yes, I am interested in skiing. What that has to do with the toaster, I don't know, but oh, I'll check it out anyway, right? And then we get junk mail about it and wonder where that came from. Savings cards, other sorts of things. Pagers, cell phones are also traceable. We've become more locatable and traceable than ever before. As an experiment at home, some of you may have heard about this, pull up the Google search engine, type in your phone number with an area code. Most likely it will come up with your name, address, a link to MapQuest. You can pull up a map of your neighborhood. And if you ask it to, driving directions from here to there. And they used to offer satellite photos, and they might be able to of some neighborhoods. And that's just from a phone number. So you can think about that when you give someone your phone number. What information follows through on that. So visibility. We become more visible. There's also then, surveillance today is more impersonal than it has been in the past. More and more surveillance is accomplished not through the observation of particular individuals, but by the accumulation and the sorting and sifting of impersonal data. Judgments are made not based on the character of someone, not based on face-to-face or someone's story, but simply on some numbers, some sort of profile that has been created. Think of the difference between a small bookshop and a sort of larger corporate bookshop. A small bookshop where the owner knows the books and the customers, and the corporate bookstore where everyone is relatively anonymous. This is an idealized distinction. In a small shop, the proprietor knows the regulars, and the one watching over people can make judgments. This is a regular person, this is someone who's a stranger, I'll watch them more. But if there's a transgression, you can deal with it on an individual basis. On a larger store where it's more impersonal, everyone is watched. Right? The surveillance in these bookstores is not just of the strangers, or not just of the suspicious, it is of everyone, especially the employees. As a student of mine who works in one of these stores says, most of the cameras are behind the cash wrap. In a way, it's oddly democratizing. Everyone becomes an object of suspicion. But it's also rather less friendly. Right? There is no forgiveness in this system. Just as in many ways, there is no forgiveness in the psalm, in the model of the psalm, based on the panopticon. It is strictly one-way observation. There is no response to the guards. Trust is a third part of this. The question of, in a society that is so large, so abstract in some ways, we don't know people personally, especially the ones that are making decisions about our lives. We have to trust in abstract systems. We have to trust in the banking system or other sorts of systems. We have to trust in strangers. And how do we do that? We have to come up with systems of surveillance, ID cards, driver's licenses, and the rest, to create a sense of trust. Right? To deem someone trustworthy or creditworthy. In many ways, it seems, we are guilty until proven innocent, or at least creditworthy. Modern society is characterized by this sort of abstraction. But finally, simulation, risk, and prediction. Surveillance is now tied to simulation and prediction. It becomes a way of managing risk. Remember CCTV, the closed-circuit television. It's not about preventing crime, spotting something, sending out the officers, and stopping it, though that sometimes happens. But it's about profiling suspicious behavior in individuals. You no longer wait for events to happen, no longer wait for a crime to happen or an illness to happen. We try to prevent that. We try to reduce the risk of that. And we do so by finding at-risk populations. People become suspicious not based on their actions, but how they fall into risk groups. One is judged based on one's risk group. In the group for heart disease, sorry, no insurance, even if you're healthy. If you're poor and minority, you're considered a criminal, etc. Surveillance is then about finding patterns and then generalizing about these patterns, and judging people based on these patterns, rather than judging people based on the person themselves. Right? I'm sorry, the numbers don't add up. I might believe your story, you're a very sympathetic person, I believe but I can't believe you, I have to believe this information. The use of increasingly things like DNA evidence and the rest is an interesting way of getting someone to testify when they're not testifying. We don't believe someone's story anymore. We look for the science and the evidence. Right? So we look for, see if their body can testify as to who they are rather than who they say they are, which has interesting implications. Needless to say, the types and amounts of surveillance to which one is subjected varies considerably according to one's class, one's race, one's ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation. Now, to respond to surveillance, University of Toronto professor Steve Mann gives the analogy of surveillance to a natural gas leak. Natural gas has no smell. It is very dangerous. The gas company adds the smell to natural gas so we know when the leak has occurred, so we can phone it in and say this is something dangerous. Getting junk mail, he says, this is the smell. It means something is leaking. Your information is leaking. Right? But what we complain about is the non-useful junk mail. If we get junk mail and we like it, it's interesting, we don't complain about that. We complain about the stuff. In other words, we want it to smell better. It's not that we're complaining about the smell. We simply want the gas leak to smell better, but we ignore the leak itself. Where is this information coming from? We should care that our information is leaking. Keep some control of our own information, especially since its loss can be ruinous. Shred everything. But Mann also points out that the proliferation of surveillance on daily level can be a good thing if the means of surveillance become available to all. He actually likes the possibility of cell phone cameras and portable webcams and other sorts of things, if everyone has access to these. This is what he calls surveillance. Surveillance is, surveillance is to watch from above. He calls this surveillance, sur from below. Surveillance from below. Who watches the watchers? Right? This chance to sort of look back at the surveillance cameras, to look back at where these are, to speak back to the organizations, he says is very important to keep them in check. It can be democratizing if an available force to all. Let me say, I'm running out of time, this will be quick. A couple things about privacy. Because privacy is what we usually fall back on when talking about surveillance, to counter it. Well, there's privacy, right? It's an invasion of privacy. The problem with privacy as an argument against increased surveillance is that privacy is actually a relatively recent concept. It is something that was only available to the very wealthy and relatively available to people only recently. Only the wealthy had privacy at one point. Privacy is an individual argument. When we talk about an invasion of privacy, we talk about an invasion of my privacy. Surveillance becomes a problem if it bothers one person and they respond. What the problem with doing that is you don't look at surveillance as a social problem. And if we think of surveillance as in terms of categorization and judging categories of people, it becomes a social problem and not an individual problem. It might not be a problem for you or me in particular, but it could be a broader social issue and therefore needs to be addressed, but privacy doesn't get us there. There are a couple other things I want to mention which might be other ways of responding. So quickly on, before I open this to questions, a couple things on the culture of surveillance. How surveillance has impacted our experience of daily life. Surveillance entails cultural as well as social concerns. It affects our sense of the world, our experience of the world, and the meanings we make of the world. Communication scholar James Carey has written that the sense that someone is always watching, potentially at least, is part of the structure of feeling of modern life. The sense that someone is watching is part of the structure of feeling of modern life. So quickly touching on three dimensions of sort of this structure of feeling. Voyeurism, fear, and community. Voyeurism, the desire to look, the pleasure in watching, especially that which is private, seems to be something that is part of our contemporary culture, especially in terms of reality television or other sorts of types of things. The consumption of revealing images of and information about others' apparently real and unguarded lives. There is a cultural move in society to seek the real, the authentic. We want to see real people on TV. We want to see not produced or fake. We want to see actual people in who aren't sort of the creation of the entertainment industry in American Idol. We want to see real people eat whatever they eat on Fear Factor, or have to deal with the cameras in Big Brother, or the rest. Reality TV has a relatively long history. In 1971, PBS ran a show called An American Family, and this was sort of television verite, where cameras were allowed in the household of the Louds, a quote-unquote typical American middle-class family, for 7 months. And this was then broadcast on television, everything that happened. What happened was that the family broke apart. Tensions that were there, the family split up, one of the children came out of the closet, there was divorce, there was all these tensions while the cameras were there, and it played out for fascinating television. The French social critic Jean Baudrillard, talking about An American Family, said that this was a sacrificial spectacle. Right? To put it up, put these people, the Louds, were sacrificed for some sort of sin of society. If we think of reality television as some sort of sacrificial spectacle, we're watching these people go through these extreme situations for something. Right? What that is, what it is we're missing that people want to watch this, is then the question. The second part of this, and part of our current culture of surveillance, is the current culture of fear. It's been called a culture of fear. This idea that life has become more and more fearful, that the news is continually presenting us with new dangers. There's one communication scholar, George Gerbner, who has theorized what he calls the mean world syndrome. The more television you watch, the more fearful you believe the world is, the more dangerous the world is. And he has done studies, some of which have been replicated, to this end. Right? That the more television, the more media you watch, the more you worry about all these various dangers and other sorts of things. The world is a fearful place, natural disasters, terrorists, and poisons. And the more we fear, he says, the more we want protection. So the continuing sort of sense of being unease, of being fearful of whatever, right, is part of the current culture and gets tied with surveillance. Now, theorists have speculated that one of the causes of the culture of fear is the loss of a sense of community, especially diverse community. Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, documents the decline in civic participation in the United States. We simply aren't going out for even bowling in teams, the main image. We go and bowl alone, we don't bowl in leagues anymore. Decline in participation in civic organizations. But this also, we retreat more to our own homes. We don't have to go out for entertainment, it all comes to us. Even our architecture. Our porches no longer face the street. It used to be that the garage was in the back and the front porch was in the front, and people would sit on their porches and be able to interact in public. Now the garage is in the front and the porch is in the back. Right? There is less interaction. There are less opportunities to mingle in public with a diverse community. There is a retreat to more homogeneous, self-enclosed communities. Right? Therefore, there's less experience of diverse others, greater fear, and suspicion of the different. Now, this is not to idealize some fabled small town. At one point, there was this small town where we were all happy, and now we are all anonymous. Because if you want a surveillance society, the small town is it. A friend of mine moved to a very small town to teach, and he walked into the bank in order to open his account, and they knew his name. He said, "Oh yeah, we've been expecting you to come." His students would ask him how he liked the movies he rented over the weekend. This is small town society. But at least in these cases, it's people doing the looking and the judging. Right? There is chances for forgiveness, to get to know someone, to get to know who they're about, and to have personal knowledge, rather than abstract systems that are making judgments based on numbers. When discussing the society of surveillance, privacy is the most common response. Here I want to touch very briefly on three others. One, justice. The system in place, is it a just system? Fairness. Does the system work well for all? We get all these privacy notices, right? Here's our privacy policy. Do we ever get a fair information policy? This is how we're using our information, and this is why it's fair or not. And finally, dignity. Right? I think important for this group. The UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Human being has a right to dignity. When reality television was protested in Europe, they didn't protest it based on this was an invasion of people's privacy. They said this is an invasion of people's dignity. And therefore, even if they've assented to it, yes, we want to go along with this, we'll have our privacy invaded, they said no, this is a fundamental assault to human dignity. So to keep these questions in mind when thinking about particular issues of surveillance.
Okay. Maybe one last. I'm going to switch this up.
Briefly. He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. And Calvin says Santa Claus, kindly old elf, or CIA spook. Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Questions?
Questions?
What do you think of putting this maybe children so they can be tracked in case of kidnapping or this?
Like I said, there's always good reasons for surveillance. You can think, as a sort of taking the yellow alert system, well, you know where your child is and you're fearful of it being, your child being kidnapped. But then there are other issues as well, because my dogs have ID chips in them. Am I making that equation if I want to put an ID chip in my child? Okay, someone, we can track her down. That would be important. I would want someone to be able to do that. But it has these other implications. There's other ways of dealing with that, making sure that she's not alone. She's not in a situation where something. There's.
Well, that little girl was kidnapped in Salt Lake City. She would have had that.
They would have tracked someone down, right? If you have it.
How many of you comment on the apparent overfill that Patriot had?
Where to begin on the Patriot Act? how it was passed, what it actually says. The Patriot Act was a series of initiatives that various agencies had wanted forever and have never been able to get. When September 11th came along, they said, this is our opportunity, they'll pass anything. And they did. They put everything that they ever wanted, including being able to go in and search people's homes without telling them until like months later, and speeding up all sorts of other types of surveillance and wiretapping, and that got put in place. In wartime, there's always some sort of erosion of civil rights for the protection of society. In this particular type of war on terror, there is no end point in that wartime, and that's, I think, what worries people. Like we'll buck up, we'll deal with this, for a foreseeable future, but there is no foreseeable future on this. This is potentially the way society is going to go and continue. So there are issues there that need to be carefully debated, and they haven't been carefully debated, I think, and publicly debated, that are in the Patriot Act.
Yeah, I have a comment and a question, and I'm not sure which is which. First of all, my question is, why doesn't Bush subpoena God, or is that a comment? The comment is, if everybody, or if 1% of people put out a webcam of just their daily activities, it would numb, there'd be so much information out there, nobody would be interested. Everything would be common.
Bush is God. He doesn't have to speak himself.
I quoted from Steve Mann earlier, the Toronto, he's a computer scientist, he's a performance artist. He has created his own system where he perceives reality via his computer. Whereas he has a webcam mounted on himself, which then feeds sort of the images of the outside, which then get projected on his retina. So he only sees things. So he can then alter the world. He can then sort of program it. The ideal is to program it to get rid of advertisements, to sort of change. He says, look, I want to change everything to black and white. He's in a black and white world, literally in a black and white world. But also one of the things that he did was he turned his camera on live on the web. So everywhere he went, he was seeing people, interacting with people, and that was live streamed on the web. And he has students that do this as well. And the idea that if everyone did that, right, is this a good thing or a bad thing? But then everyone could then see. And he said, well, the advantages of, you could see what other people see you as. You could go on a date, he says, and you could actually see what you look like from your date's perspective. But everyone was then potentially sort of under this sort of constant surveillance. He says it's democratizing in many ways, right? Giving the tools. But then there's that uncomfortable notion of images of yourself being distributed without your permission.
You had mentioned something about the reality TV and that people want to see real people on TV. But the one thing people don't realize is that these real people on TV are really just a certain class of people. Because the normal, common person doesn't do that.
Right.
It's the people who are extreme risk takers or really just need to act out whatever. And most of the people that see this think this is real, and it's not.
Right.
I mean, it really isn't.
But this is normal. Right. Even more, I mean, we know television isn't normal, but that it shifts our sense of, well, what's normal? Right? What does society look like? Right? Who is available is partly shaped by who we see on TV. And so the reality television, well, this must be real people, but yeah, there's people you're not going to see on this. A lot of real people you're not going to see on reality TV.
Are we becoming a nation of voyeurs? What is so fascinating that we're all watching reality? Starting out my old people, a bunch of women living in the house, and every day, they cry because they haven't talked to their father in years. And who really cares? But Why are we so fascinated by this? And who is watching this? It reminded me of something that our Nana was talking about. Who's watching all this stuff live? I mean, that's fascinating by it.
What's interesting is sort of what's considered real for reality TV, and not just sort of it's dramatized, it's scripted, it's edited, it's fake, but what is it that they're trying to get at? And actually, one of the things that is seen as real is emotion, because that's what gets played up. If you look at the advertisements, what they want, they see the conflict. They want to see, oh, people falling in love in the Big Brother house. They want to see, you know, extreme disgust. They want to see people getting ill. They want to see, but that is seen as what is most real about people, is their emotions. So it's just like you want to see people in these situations. Exactly, right?
I think people like to compare themselves with other people too. To say, you know, am I alright, or are they less than me? Am I more than them? Or constantly, you know.
How would I deal with that situation? Yeah. At least I'm not. I think that's people say that's the appeal of like Jerry Springer and things like that. Oh, I'm not that. You know, my family's dysfunctional, but we're not that dysfunctional.
On balance, do you consider surveillance to be beneficial or detrimental to modern society?
It is necessary for society. The character of that surveillance is, the question is surveillance more beneficial or detrimental to society? It's the character of the surveillance that we have. Most of the surveillance systems in place, I think, are necessary for society to function as it does. With the numbers of people to do the complex sorts of things that we do, we need complex systems of surveillance. What we need then is accountability. And that's the danger, is that that accountability won't be there. That we won't have access to all the public information that we should have. Post 9/11, a lot of public information suddenly got pulled off of websites and other things and aren't available anymore. On balance, I think if we consider the broad view of what surveillance is, on balance, it's supportive of society. But there are numerous dangers in there, numerous trends in it, which could be very detrimental to the idea of democracy within society.
Is it not something like communism? The ideal may be great, but it never got to the ideal stage. It got to a power play. And this surveillance is the same thing. It would be great for society, but at the moment it's not, and it's going to be power.
It is something in place that can be easily used, not for care, but for control, for that other flip side. So, it is. It's necessary for the caring society, but that dangers of it places us all under control is there as well.
My power's good, your power's bad.
Well, it's one of the technical fixes. We want to go for a technical fix rather than looking at a more complex social issue. So rather than looking at the origins of crime, we put in surveillance cameras and we lock people up. Rather than looking at the origins of drug abuse, we look for drug testing. We don't look at uses or other reasons. We don't look at the broader social issues. We want something quick and easy, and the technology seems to do that, and it reduces all those issues. So that's part of a number of ways that we fetishize technology. Any other questions? I'm not sure where we are in the time.
One more.
I'll just ask one. Back when Orwell first came out, there was a big debate about Big Brother society when it was still imaginary. I remember one person making a comment that he really didn't care how many cameras they put in, because half of them would probably be broken. The people who were watching them would be falling asleep anyway. So I guess
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
my question is, that's tough. My question is, with all the enormous multiplication of surveillance cameras, how many people can, I guess, is there a point where you just can't create enough people to watch them? And what are they anyhow?
Well, I think
You want to repeat that, Greg, for the...
the question is sort of with the proliferation of surveillance cameras, is this sort of information overkill? Who's going to watch all this stuff? Who's going to monitor it? And studies of people watching surveillance cameras show that you can sort of pay attention for about 10 minutes. You know, after that, your concentration starts waning, and therefore, what good is this? Right? So there must be other uses. It's not, they don't prevent crime. But what it does is creates all this information, which then can get sifted through. I mean, even with this global echelon system, 9/11 was not prevented. With all the surveillance in place, a lot of things are not prevented. So we have, yeah, it's more and more information that is created that is sitting there that we can't deal with.
But how do you search for visual information? You have the tape recording all these surveillance cameras running the tape recorders, and the computers that can track what people are doing on the camera.
They're actually,
I understand how echelon works. They go for certain sound.
They're actually working on visual recognition of pieces of people and behaviors. So there's one system that's being tested out of surveillance cameras in parking lots, right, to sort of track people and see if they're behaving suspiciously or not. So coming up with computer codes to code that visual information, that's the next stage. And so you start thinking about, well, what does it mean to act suspiciously in a parking lot? So we talk about sort of the self-reflection on behavior, what's normative behavior. But there are sort of moves to sort of begin to analyze visual data in this way. And think, how am I going to act normally for a computer? And should I act normally for a computer? If I'm just walking to my car, should I even have that in my head, that I have to behave normally?
The woman that was beating her child in the car, was that something they went looking for after someone saw her doing that, or were they routinely screening and they saw that? That's the kind of question I think you're asking.
Yeah, I don't.
Do they catch up for it, or do they screen all these, go, wow, look at that, let's find her?
Good question. I'm not sure with that case if it was that someone else saw what happened and then they went back and found the videotape. But that is that. Talk about sort of the criminals and others, but issues of abuse, the proliferation of cameras. There's Project Witness, which distributes cameras to groups around the world to document abuse in many different ways. So using these technologies, you can document abuses of the system. The same technologies which can be used by the system to abuse liberties.
If you appreciate the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix and would like to see more, then subscribe to our channel and check us out on Patreon. Links are in the description.